Gilad Atzmon is a British jazz artist and he's an author. He's very well known here in Cyprus to fans of the jazz genre because he regularly visits and performs all over the island. He's also given a seminar while he was here this time. Gilad, you come here how many times a year? Because you've got a huge fan base in Cyprus.
Yeah, I think that people like me here, but this year I came 3 months ago and we're going to make it a regular thing now. I think that the jazz playing, the level of musicianship in this island improved a lot in the last 10 years. Some great musicians came back from Berkeley and some other schools in Europe, and they're doing a great job, and I have a lot of good people to play with, so it's a lot of fun.
You've been called one of the hardest gigging jazz musicians on the planet, and that means, I presume, that you play with lots of different people in many different countries.
I like to travel. A lot of people think that I'm extremely clever, but I think that the fact that I come with some interesting ideas has a lot to do with the fact that I'm traveling a lot, and I meet very interesting people, and I see things from many different perspectives.
And your perspective, if we come on to politics, particularly on the Israeli-Palestinian crisis, is very different from certainly many Israelis. You were born, I think, in Israel.
Yeah.
But what do you make of the current situation in that conflict, which I always think of as a suppurating, festering sore that is actually probably the reason for so much conflict in the whole of the Middle East?
I think that in the whole of the world, actually, at the moment. For me, Israel is a problem. It is a very big problem, but it is just a symptom of a far greater problem, which I define as Jewish politics or Jewish identity politics. We can see what is happening in Israel and Palestine. Palestine is Israel. We can see what is happening in Syria, what is happening in Iraq. We know very well that it was Jewish lobbies around the world that pushed for the war in Iraq. We know that it was Jewish lobbies in America, in France, in Britain that pushed for intervention in Syria at the time. And I believe that if we want to see a prospect of peace, to start to think in peaceful terms again, we have to identify those who are pushing us into more and more conflicts. And I see Jewish politics, global Jewish politics, at the heart of it. Now, you want me to talk about the situation in Palestine? This is quite devastating, but we have to look at it in proper historical perspectives. The Zionist movement that was established in the late 19th century, to be precise, 1897, the first Zionist Congress in Basel, was largely an anti-Semitic movement. They were very upset when they look in the mirror. They didn't like the Jew. They didn't like the Jew being at the center of banking and capitalism and lobbying. And they said, we have a problem. The diaspora Jew is a problem, but it's not his or her fault. It is because these people are detached from their land. For them, Zion, i.e. Palestine, was the Jewish land. And they said, once we engage in a process of homecoming, what they regarded as their home, I don't think that they have anything to do with this part of the world. Once we engage in homecoming, this will change. will see a new Jew. And by the way, I am kind of a product of that process. Half of my family, my mother's family, they came to the region as Zionists, and in the 30s. The other side of my family been there from the 19th century. They are basically Palestinian Jews.
That's it, very interesting, because if you go back to the 19th century or before, the whole area was a total mix of Christians, Muslims,
For
Jews.
sure.
They were all... I hesitate to put a label. You can't call them Palestinians or Jews or anybody else. They were just the people of
They
the
were
region.
Palestinians. They were Palestinians. Both my parents have a Palestinian birth certificate. You are totally right. And my grandfather, father's side, spoke Arabic like an Arab. But the issue here is that I go back to this topic, the Zionism. Zionism promised to change the Jew, to civilize. They really spoke about civilizing the Jew, make the Jew into an authentic human being that is connected to the soil, that engages in agriculture, and so on and so on. And here we are, 60, 70, 80 years down the road. To a certain extent, some people can count as many as 100 or even 120 if you want to start in 1897. And the Jews are back in the ghetto. They surrounded themselves with humongous ghetto walls. They are detached from the land. The agriculture is gone. The industry is gone. Israel is basically a place where Jewish oligarchs all over the world can hide their dirty money. It is an awful place. And I think that it's not a coincidence, because even the radical Zionists themselves couldn't bring a change, because the people that were supposed to be schlepped, to be moved, to be transferred into the Middle East were the Jews, and they brought those symptoms with them.
Do you go back to Israel?
Never.
When were you last there?
Probably 95 or 96, so it's like 20 or 21, 22 years.
Because a lot of people would say to you, I'm being devil's advocate here, that if you don't go back, and I presume you have family there, visit your family, meet the people who are there and so on, and discuss with them, how do you really know what the feeling is in Israel? Because what we're seeing, particularly under the present government, is very clear policies, and we all know what they are. But how do the people of Israel feel? Are they supportive of this? Because the biggest dissenting voices seem to me to be coming from Jews in the diaspora, the Jewish Voice for Peace, for people in
I'm
the UK
not very
and so
impressed.
on.
I'm not very impressed with all those Jewish dissidents. I think that they are part. They're not just part of the problem. They may as well be the core of the problem. What all those Jewish organizations managed to do along the years is to become more and more dominant within the solidarity movement. They cleansed this movement of any intellectuals that were willing to touch the real problems. For them, the battle for Palestine is primarily a battle against anti-Semitism, as if they have anything to do with Semitism. But I'll address your earlier question. You're right, I'm not going to Israel. I obviously don't conduct interviews with Israelis. I monitor Israeli press in Hebrew on a daily basis, and I'm one of the very few people who are doing it and reporting the thing that the Israelis don't report in their English Asbara press. You know, you have Haaretz in Hebrew that comes with one story, and Haaretz in English that comes with a slightly different story. The same applies to Ynet and all their media outlets. There is a point in what you're saying here, a few weeks ago, a very interesting statistics came out, and it suggested that Israel is among the worst place on the planet in terms of social equality. So the gap between rich and poor is humongous. It was the third from the bottom of developed countries. The same poll suggested that in spite of that, the Israelis are amongst the happiest people on the planet. So they are happy to be abused. Now, this actually supports what I just said 5 minutes ago about the ghetto mentality. The Jews were very, very happy in the ghetto, and in fact, one of the early Zionists, Nordo, said exactly that. We were happy in the ghetto. We are not happy with this emancipation, with the idea that we can become people like all other people in France and in Britain. We like these insular conditions, and they definitely managed to erect the ghetto once again. It is a dangerous ghetto. Now, go forward to JVP, to all those Jewish organizations. I don't know if whether you are a Jew or not, but let's assume that you are not. If you're not a Jew, you can definitely subscribe to JVP. You can donate to JVP. They will be very happy to take your money. However, there is one thing that you will never be. You will never be the secretary of JVP. And the reason is quite devastating. You are not racially qualified. You are not a Jew. Now, if Israel is a problem because it is a racist country, so you would expect its dissenters, Jewish dissenters, to be anti-racist, and devastatingly enough, there are actually more racists than Israel, because in Israel, the third party in the parliament is an Arab party, while in JVP board, we don't find any Goyim or Gentiles, whatever you want to call it, in any decision-making position. So it's a tribal operation, and it's actually identical with Israel. The fact that the dissent to Israel is dominated by those kind of people definitely explains why nothing good happened in Palestine and why the solidarity movement failed for so many years.
What is the answer? Is there an answer? Because I do detect, globally and particularly on popular media and social media, a change in attitude, particularly since the last operation in Gaza. That seems to have, in a sense, brought people up short. I know it brought me up short to realise exactly what was going on. Perhaps it was just that prior to that, we hadn't been quite so exposed through social media to what was actually happening on the ground because of the well-known mainstream media blackout on a lot of this stuff.
I will help you out.
Has it changed? Yeah. And if it hasn't, what needs to happen to make it change?
Okay, to start with, I'm not an activist. I'm a philosopher. I'm a thinker. My job is not to provide you with answers, but instead to try to help you to refine the questions. I believe that once we understand what the questions are, we then can come up with different answers and may even be contradicting answers. So, for instance, rather than talking about Israel and Zionism, let's call Israel for what it is. Israel defines itself as the Jewish state. If Israel defines itself as the Jewish state, the first questions that we have to ask are, who are the Jews? What is Judaism? And what is Jewishness?
But it seems that no Jews can agree on that, because you talk about...
One minute, I'm going to address it. Who are the Jews? What is Judaism? And what is Jewishness? How these three terms relate to each other? How do they relate to Jewish politics, Israeli politics, Zionist politics, and so on and so on? Now, you are right. These questions are pretty much prohibited. So Israel calls itself the Jewish state, and we are not entitled to ask what Jewishness stands for. This is why I came to the conclusion that first we have to define what Jewish power is all about. Jewish power is the power to stop you asking what is Jewish power. It is a silencing mechanism, and this is exactly what I am doing. I am defining this unique kind of racially oriented, Jews are not race, but their politics is more than often racist. I try to provide analysis of this matrix of racist ideologies that are supremacist and tribally oriented. And I guess that if I have to judge by the amount of opposition I face, I probably do a good job.
But we're back to, is there an answer to stopping the killing, to coming to some sort of agreement with the Palestinians so that both the Jewish people and the Palestinians, and indeed the Christians and all the other people who live in that area, can look forward to a peaceful future for their grandchildren?
Let me tell you something that you're not going to like, if you don't mind. But I think that you would have to agree with me. I think that more and more people understand now that what we see in Palestine is just a symptom. By now, we are all Palestinians. You are a Palestinian. I'm a Palestinian. We are seeing the Jewish lobby buying the Labour Party. So people in Britain cannot actually tell the truth about Jewish power, about Jewish history. Ken Livingstone was expelled or suspended from the party for telling the truth about Hitler and his collaboration with Zionists in 1933. This situation is ridiculous, and I'm actually very, very happy, because it is very difficult to deliver the truth about Palestine through The Guardian, because now The Guardian is the guardian of Judea. It's impossible to see the truth when you watch the BBC for the same reason. It's fine. You don't have to look at Palestine. You don't have to watch the BBC. Look what they're doing in Britain. Look how the Congress groveled to Benjamin Netanyahu. So I'm actually welcoming, I'm welcoming Jewish power celebrating itself, because this is the only way people can see how devastating the situation is. I think that we are on the very positive path towards enlightenment.
And with enlightenment, you hope for what?
I prefer not to think about it. Ideally, and this is Gilad Atzmon, ideally, it would be very refreshing to see Jews realizing the disaster that they are bringing on themselves, to acknowledge that something is not right. And these things happened a few times in the past. I'll give you one example. There was a guy, 2016 years ago he was around, his name was Jesus Christ. And he realized that something was wrong. And he said, can we just love our neighbor? Can we just learn to turn the other cheek? You know what happened to him? Zionism, when he told the truth about the Jews, when it was really anti-Semitic, it was extremely unpopular amongst Jews. So ideally, I would have loved to see Jews turning away, but I don't think that this is going to happen. I think, and this is very devastating, I think that they are working hard, some of them at least, bringing a disaster on themselves. But this is the nature of history. I was born in 1963. The Holocaust wasn't a big thing in Israel at the time, you have to understand. It became a big thing. People say, there are some discussions between historians maybe after 77 when Menachem Begin became the president. He was kind of a more Holocaust-oriented leader. He was Polish himself, kind of escaped. And last minute, anyway. But when I started to look into the Holocaust, I could never understand at the time as a kid how it could happen. What these Jews had to do to bring such a disaster on themselves. I never understood it. And when I look at Israeli politics, when I look at Jewish extensive lobbying, when I look at Bibi Netanyahu speaking in front of the Congress against the will of the president, when I look at the British Labour and its capitulation, I understand that there is something within Jewish identity politics that is set to bring those kind of disasters on Jews, and so many Jews are innocent and have nothing to do with it. This is totally clear. Even Israelis, many Israelis, I don't want to say most, I don't want to talk about statistics, have nothing to do with this moronic behavior. Now, if you really want to understand what is going on, it is very possible that those disasters that happen to the Jews so often are inherent to the Jewish existence. Because when you look at it, they gained a lot out of the Holocaust. If there wasn't an Holocaust, there wouldn't be Israel. They learned to translate this pain into a lot of money, reparation money. They managed to translate German, American, British guilt into a huge political power. It is quite devastating because if they are suicidal, or if they have this suicidal element within their culture, it is a big problem for them. But the problem is that when it happens, many other people also die. And the only thing that I can do is to tell the truth as I see it. I don't claim to know the truth. I'm quite effective in detecting lies. I want to believe that what I'm saying is the truth, and I want to believe that by saying it, I may manage to deliver a message and maybe to help people to understand what is happening there, but also to help Jews how dangerous the game their politicians are involved with.
If we can come very quickly, I know I can't keep you much longer,
No, it's okay.
to your books, because you've written a novel, Guide to the Perplexed, and My One and Only Love, and also I've read about A to Zion, the definitive Israeli lexicon.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about the writings that you've got out there and where people can get hold of them.
You missed the Wandering Who. That is obviously my most controversial book. It's a book that was endorsed by the most important humanists, basically, on or some of the most important humanists on this planet. And I got a lot of flack for this book, but in this book I try to ask, what is that thing called Jew? We are going to play this tune, what is that thing called love? You know, yeah, at a certain stage in my life, it was quite a surprise for me. I realized that I could write, because as a kid, I'm kind of dyslexic. And I cannot, even when I write, I cannot read my handwriting. Once I had a computer, and it was pretty much as early as computers were available for ordinary people. I was the first one to buy one. And I started to write, and I really enjoyed it. And at a certain stage, I think when in 93, 94, when I moved to England, I was probably slightly bored, and I wrote this book. Basically, I sent it by fax to every night. I sent another chapter to a friend, to a few friends actually, and they really liked it, and I never did anything with it. And I found it by mistake 6 years later, in 2001 or 2002, and I started to read it, and I thought that it was hilarious. I was doing my PhD in philosophy in England at the time. It was written in Hebrew, and I sent it to an Israeli publisher, and within 3 hours I had an offer. I then somebody bought the options to make it into a film, and they translated 30 pages, and I found a literary agent. She's still my literary agent, and she managed within the next 2 months to sell it in 26 languages, just based on these 30 pages. She herself, she didn't see the book. It was very funny. It was full with sex. I was very young. I was very horny. Thanks God, I'm getting older. I can think about other things but women. Then I wrote a second book because I wasn't sure that I was a real writer, because it was so successful. I was traveling all over the world, and they regarded me actually as a good Jew. And I was really annoyed by it, because I wasn't a good Jew. I never been a proper Jew. When you're an Israeli, my generation, we didn't see ourselves as proper Jews. We were not religious, so we were kind of living on the land. We were kind of secular. So I thought, I'm not a good Jew. I don't even want to be good. So I wrote another book. It was slightly strange. Some people thought that it was very, very important text. Other people thought that it was a very a disgrace form of total disaster in terms of literature. And at that stage, in 2002, 2003, 4, 5, I really lost any interest in fictional writing. I started to write more and more papers about Jewish identity, about Jewish politics. I really wanted to understand it. I think that it's a fascinating subject. It is a fascinating subject. People who every 70 years have a Holocaust. It's incredible. It's unique. And they are very clever, and still they don't learn, or maybe they learn and they hide the knowledge. I don't know. It's very interesting. And I then published The Wandering Who. The Wandering Who was a big bestseller. It was translated into many languages. It is an attempt to understand what is really going in there. With this unique identity, it delves into the power, the matrix of power, the role of the Jewish left, which is beyond dishonest. And then a few months ago, I published this A to Zion. A to Zion is a very, very funny book. It is basically The Wandering Who in 5 minutes. It's basically a toilet book. It's full with cartoons that were made by my great friend Enzo Apicella, the Italian cartoonist. He's now 96 years old. We had the launch in New York the other day, and he's full with life. The book was actually his idea. I'm very good in summarizing kind of big concept, big term, big ideas into one sentence, what you call aphorism. So
It's very tongue-in-cheek, though, isn't it?
yeah. So you know, you have anti-Semites. Nobody knows what anti-Semites are. Anti-Semites are, according to the book, brutally honest people, usually of Jewish origin. Bar mitzvah. Do you know what bar mitzvah
I
is?
read that one too, yes.
Bar mitzvah, I think, is the moment when the male Jew accepts that his foreskin is not going to grow back. Land of Canaan, the land of milking money, and so on and so on. Adolf, not a common name for a newborn in Europe. You know, Arabs, people who were invented to thrust into the sea. It's basically all my ideas condensed into
A very small book.
a very small book. Yeah.
They can get these through your website?
They can get it on Amazon in America, in Britain, in pretty much everywhere. Everywhere else, you can always get. You have a good chance to get it in my gigs if I remember to take them. It's a funny book, by the way. I didn't get any flack for this book, which
Was a surprise to you, I imagine.
it's disappointing. It's disappointing because the way I work, you know, I say a few things and then Jews get annoyed and make sure that everyone else know what I have in mind, you know. My entire PR campaign was based on those people being annoyed. And I think that they realize it, and I didn't find yet the appropriate system to distribute my ideas. May have to start to annoy other people.
You mentioned the gig, it's coming up pretty shortly.
Yeah.
A final word then about your music and where it's taking you now, because it's been a long journey. You've covered so many different types of music, and I think you sometimes switch sort of world music into the jazz, and so I mean it's a real amalgam, I think, of many different genres.
Yeah. I think that the great news of the day is that the music industry is pretty much dead, which means that we are totally free. We can play whatever we like, we can do whatever we want. We are not committed to a genre or a style. Our job is to produce beauty. Beauty spreads happiness and peace. But more than anything else, I do believe that the artist, the real artist, is the most important person around. Because our job as artists is to introduce an alternative reality. And this is what I try to do with my music, with my writing, with being there. Some people say about me, and it's true, you know, people go to work in the morning, they go to make cars, build houses, work in the radio, and so on and so on. All I do for a living is being me. You know, I wake up in the morning, and by 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock in the night, or 12 o'clock in the night, you know, all I do during the entire day is being Gilad Atzmon, writing and making music.
And making wonderful music.
Thank you so much.
Well, you said the music industry is dead. In actual fact, the industry might be, but I don't think I've ever seen more people all over the world who go to live music, concerts and shows.
I agree
the
with
one
you.
you're going to do tonight is in a very cosy space.
It's beautiful. I love it.
So it's so much more intimate. It's so much more, in a sense, a sharing of,
Yeah.
of your philosophy.
Yeah, I never liked doing big festivals, which I do, you know, obviously, but I really like to see every person in my audience and to see the impact when I'm with my eyes open. Usually, most of the time they're closed when I play. To feel the vibe of a room, to let my saxophone resonate through the walls, something that I never get, you know, when I, you know, the other day I played in a massive place. It's just all through microphones, and I really like acoustics. This is the truth of this art form. You know, waves that shake and things around them.
And communicate.
Yeah.
Well, Gilad Atzmon has been talking to us. He's in Cyprus for several concerts. He also gave a seminar, and I'm pretty sure he will be back again. We didn't even talk about his work with Ian Dury and the Blockheads, and you need to go to giladatzmon.com, I think, and find out more about an extraordinary man and join him next time he's in Nicosia.
Thank you so much. It was a lot of fun talking to you.